Hey, what's up, guys? Just wanted to come out with another quick video here for you and talk a little bit about lineups and what you guys do and sort of what my approach is here. So it depends, I think, sort of on the game that you have. I showed this to you a couple of videos ago. We were talking about lineups in NPIII and in Diamond Mine Baseball. It's a little bit easier in Diamond Mine Baseball to sort of double-click a player and see exactly how he's hitting right now. This has come to my mind really because of the progress that I've made so far in the 1908 replay. We're just about up to the time where it's time to start fiddling around with some of these lineups and thinking about maybe we should go with other guys starting and trying to take guys in and doing all those fun things that you can do when you're not playing with real-life lineups. Now, real-life lineups is easier, and in terms of realism, it is more correct in that guys are likely going to get the right number of starts. You have to be careful with this still, though, because usually when we're talking about real-life lineups and we're talking about realism, we're worried about player usage, specifically about overusing players who, played in a very, very small number of at-bats and did very, very well and end up with cards that look absolutely incredible, right? So it's kind of hard. You want to avoid doing that, make sure that you're starting guys who are regular starters. But as I believe I've said before on a video, I know I've written this before, you have to be really, really careful with that approach because if you use nothing but real-life lineups, you will come across really bizarre situations. For example, in real life, the team has already clinched, and so they put out, there's second string players or whatever for the September game, but in your replay, it's really close and they really need to win and stuff. That happens a lot in replays. It happens more often than you think. So you have to be really kind of careful about your approach. So I'll show you just really simple what I do. We'll go over here to this screen view. And I'll show you here this document I've made. This is with LibreOffice. What I did here at the start of the season is I came up with sort of a very rough sketch of what I wanted the batting order to be for every team. You can see I have these tabs here down below with all of the teams in them. This is all black because I have this in LibreOffice and I put on dark mode. I put a little bit of notes here, not quite sure, for example, who actually the Pirates' first baseman was in 1908. With the Cardinals, I had a real hard time figuring it out because they had the fielders rotating all over the place. With this kind of approach, it's easier to have a team like the Cubs where you know basically who the starter is and you can kind of go along with it, assuming that nobody got injured in real life or whatever it is that happened. That makes it a little bit easier, right, to keep track of this. I prefer to have a place to write this down and a place to keep track of it. I also like it to be away from the game, right, because some of these game interfaces are a little bit clunky. There's really not a place here in the game itself where you can keep track of this sort of thing. I mean, you can go over here, you can see the stats, so we can go over to the Cubs and we can see what their stats look like. Now, we don't have an OPS choice here, unfortunately, but we can take a quick look at okay, what's the on-base percentage look like for these guys? And we can look here right away. Well, maybe we should have Evers hitting first. We actually do have Evers hitting first, and it's a good thing we do. He's hitting .424 with a .537 on-base percentage, right? You can get a pretty good idea here of how you might want to set this up. Maybe we should be playing Heine Zimmerman a little bit more. We can look into the possibility. I don't know. But one of the problems you can see is I double click here and do stuff like that. I can't really get into the player, right? You can go over here to the roster. So we go over to the Cubs and we take a quick look at Zimmerman. And there he is. And he started 30 games that year, played in 4 different positions, right? But the problem is that we can't get on and see what his current stats are, right? It's separated. So it makes it a little bit difficult. It means that you kind of have to have a little bit of a game plan when you go in, have an idea of what you're doing. Now, the other thing that I've done is I've created a different file that has my own schedule on it, right? So we can go over here as part of NPIII and we can use the as-played schedule. This includes not just the schedule, but also the lineups. All of this comes from RetroSheet, which again is nice for those of you who really want to play with the real-life lineups and you have a different list of transactions that you're using. This will do it automatically. If you don't have the transaction list and you're whatever, I just want to play through this, the game has an option to automatically put the player on the right team when you come up to the game, which is pretty cool. But the problem that I have is that there's nothing we can do to change this, right? So I can't go into this and be well, I don't want the as-played schedule. I want the as-scheduled schedule. So the thing I did here is I went and grabbed the as-scheduled schedule here, and I stuck it in a spreadsheet. I'll actually show you. Let me see if I can find exactly where I got it from. I went over onto the RetroSheet site. Here we go. And downloaded their full schedule mix. And so this is what the original file looks like, this text file. And you can see it has the date, which corresponds to that first thing, number of game, which only has something if there's a double header, day of the week. I stuck that in because why, whatever. And then I have the visitor and the home team. It has the league for both teams, and then the game number that it was. And so, for example, this game that we just played, it was the 8th game for both the Reds and for the Cubs. And then it has some other information, including like, was the game actually played or not, if it was canceled or postponed, what day was it moved to and stuff. You can have a lot of fun with this if you're a researcher, if you really want to like dig deep into schedules and stuff like that. I don't care so much about this stuff, so I just removed it here. The other thing I did is I added on transactions. These transactions come from a 1908 Diamond Mine Baseball user-created season that has been around for about a decade or maybe a little bit more than that. And I basically just copied off the transactions that I knew the people, I remember when they created the season that they, went and researched. However, I also know that those transactions are not 100% complete, right? There are some problems with them. And sometimes there are problems because of how Diamond Mine Baseball categorizes things, right? So Wagner was shown as being ineligible instead of being a holdout, like almost like he was suspended. He wasn't suspended, he was a holdout, and then he returned to the team. I think this is the right day. And there's a little bit of guesswork that's involved. What I'm trying to do is I'm trying to avoid, that painful thing that will happen at the beginning of the season where you're like, I have no idea where the transactions are. And you're like, well, I have to jump into the season and have to jump deep into the newspapers and like try to figure this out. It's a little bit easier now that you have you have baseball reference, right? Because you can easily see when the player played and where there's a gap, or the player played to this day and then something happened, there was no more, and then you can just jump to the right newspaper. But even still, I mean, for a single player, it can take you like a half hour to an hour just to figure that stuff out, right? I mean, how much time do you really want to spend on it, right? It's really, really time intensive to try to do this work yourself. And while there are transaction databases out there, I've yet to see one that's really complete and that is really thorough and that has, a really strong standard as to what counts and what doesn't, right? So anyway, that's one of those things that you work on. You want to have the transactions right so that when you're playing the game, you don't have to keep looking up to see how many games this guy played in real life. You just want to play the game, right? Let real life worry about real life, right? We'll worry about that later. If we made a mistake or whatever, we made the mistake, right? We want to be in the position that the real life manager was in when this game was played and have to make the same decisions that he had to make. Anyway, there you go. That's sort of my approach and how I do this. I'd be really curious, like I said, to know kind of what everybody else does and what your approach is like. One thing that I've always wished that we had is a really, really good transaction database. We have some. I know about Baseball Sim Research. I know about some of the websites that are out there that has some information. But again, I mean, it's not as good as it could be. Right? It's not necessarily as deep and as thorough as it really ought to be. There are some people, for example, who use transaction information based upon the commissioner bulletins that came out to announce these, but we know that those are not always 100% accurate. One of the problems that you have is when you're dealing with seasons around World War I especially, or between World War I and World War II with the Philadelphia Athletics, we know that Connie Mack loved to go over and get like Sandlot kids to play like one game for him and give them a trial and see how they did. And some of those kids did really, really poorly. This is why, as is well known, especially among APBA players, that if you try to play like the 1919 season, all the teams have small rosters except for the Athletics, who have like 40-something players. They had like the record for years for the most number of players on the roster. It's because Mac would go out and get a bunch of kids from Pennsylvania playgrounds and take them over, 18, 19-year-old kids, and give them a shot and see what happened in their one game, and then he'd kind of pass off on them. Anyway, it's interesting to look at. It's interesting to know about this happening, but it really creates a problem unless you know exactly through the transactions who is who comes from where, and you have some sort of proof to back it up. Ideally, if you really wanted to be rigorous, you'd want to have more than one source, because there are newspapers that would print rumors as fact, and it would turn out to not be true. It's also difficult to figure out when the player was actually on the team to be able to play. That's really hard if you're dealing with a pre-World War I season where it's not entirely clear and where it says so-and-so will arrive at the team on such and such day, and then it turns out that they didn't. that's a lot of the work that's involved. Anyway, that's much ado about lineups. I mean, it's really, really tricky to get this right and to get it so that you feel really comfortable with it. If you're not careful, you can spend not just hours, but like 100+ hours just trying to set up your replay. That's not that much fun. So, I mean, that's probably one of the reasons why a lot of people do it with real life lineups. But having said that, then you lose a lot of control over your replay and what happens. Just a couple thoughts there, and love to hear what you have to think. Talk to you later. Bye.